Manager Will Venable said something before last night's game that has me irked, and I'll share why on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, manager Will Venable shared before last night's game he doesn't see at any point this season catchers Teel and Edgar Quero playing any other positions. And I want to discuss why I'm actually irked by that closed-minded statement. Then I want to discuss GM Chris Getz' recent comments regarding possibly keeping Luis Robert Jr. rather than trading him at the deadline. And finally, in this week's Way Back Wednesday segment, in honor of Noah Syndergaard's signing, let's go over the White Sox all-washed-up team. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, so a quick taking you behind the curtain. I debated what I wanted to lead the show off with or even discuss in the first segment. Was it going to be Will Venable's comment about not being willing to play Teel or Edgar Quero at other positions, or the fan stupid, heckling directed at Diamondback second baseman Ketel Marte that caused him to actually break down in tears on the field? And then I thought, well, the fan yelling something about Marte's mom, who passed away in a 2017 car accident, it's a simple discussion, actually. Just don't be stupid. Don't be that guy. Don't bring family into heckling. Also don't trigger a guy who goes on to hit a home run, that type of stuff. And rally, almost being a rally cry to beat the White Sox, which happened 4-1. The White Sox have scored just one run in 18 innings against the Diamondbacks. And as former host of the show, Herb Lawrence, said on X, formerly Twitter, don't say something that you're not willing to say to the man's face. It was just a coward comment. This wasn't, after further review, we still suck, like what was once famously screamed on during a Bears game. This isn't like you're going to miss, that type of friendly banter. It was a coward comment. And rightfully, the fan was removed from the game. So basically, simple comment. And I don't want to go into generational things because, again, that didn't matter. That got personal, when you go to that level. So I thought to myself, why not just go with being irked with Venable's pregame comment, which I'll admit might be an overreaction because I do get the logic in that Teel and Quero have a ton on their plate already, figuratively. And almost literally because, they sit behind home plate. But it's a dad joke. Anyways, we'll scratch that from the record. So I get why it makes sense to not have them try first base or, in Teal's case, left field. But I get irked because it's more of a big picture thing. I'm disappointed that a manager who's actually been so open-minded, he's embraced the modern of when you should be deploying your best bullpen arms. Sometimes the most critical outs are not needed in the ninth inning. The only thing I slightly disagree is you still need to have a guy that has the mental makeup or two to get those final three outs if those are the three biggest outs, just because there's just no room for error. But I get sometimes you might want to pitch Grant Taylor in the 6th or 7th inning because that's where you might need the three biggest outs and you want to have your best reliever out there. So it kind of, and also maybe having a rotation at DH. It's not the end of the world to be open-minded. Or again, having these standards of, hey, this is how we should be playing, defense and winning and embracing analytics and defensive positioning, that type of stuff. So that's where I guess I'm just a little disappointed. Just to completely shut the door that the only way to have Teel and Quero in the lineup is just one of them is DHing and the other one is catching. Because remember, there is a chance of being at a small competitive disadvantage like we saw in Texas a couple weeks ago, where Quero, who was catching that day, gets pulled for a pinch runner. Teel, who was DHing that day, has to move over to catch. And that meant giving up the DH spot. Thus, a reliever had to hit in a crucial 10th inning. So that's where I'm kind of disappointed. And for those that are going to say, well, then just call up Kyle Teel. Again, it's not so easy then carrying 3 catchers. And remember, he's just a backup catcher. That's all he's ever going to be. But where I also get a little, on that, where it's like, okay, we're just going to be so close-minded, is Teel was inserted into left field late in a game recently and basically said, hey, it's like riding a bike. I was hoping the ball gets hit to me because he played it in college. And I forgot what teammate who actually played with him at Virginia actually said he was actually one of the better defensive outfielders Virginia had. And if he does make a mistake in left, well, okay, it's a double. So that's why I'm more irked by this dogmatic statement. And here is what Jack Ankeny of Sports Illustrated, he actually tweeted out the quote. This is at Ankeny_Jack. For those watching on YouTube, I do have the quote up. Will Venable on catchers Kyle Teel and Edgar Quero playing other positions. Quote, I think for how we're set up for today, Kyle and Q behind the plate works. There's enough at-bats and enough innings for everybody. We don't like to do it, but like yesterday, we had both in the lineup. At times is something that we can do. So yeah, I don't think another position is something that we're considering right now or at any point, end quote. Excuse me? Enough at-bats? That's the excuse? Again, and maybe it's just more critiquing. I would have just gone with, hey, these 2 young rookies are being asked to handle the toughest defensive position in the game. And that's where their focus should be. Not on first, not on left. But you can't tell me there's enough at-bats when there's easily 4 at-bats for both per game, when Ryan Noda is clearly showing that he's, the latest salvage project is going to produce junk at first. Maybe you do want to just take a look at maybe one of these guys, since you do have Kyle Teel available to be a very cheap backup catcher for the rest of the decade. I mean, there are 8 at-bats if you try Teel and left later in the season, if, say, Austin Slater, Mike Tauchman, or Michael A. Taylor are traded by the deadline. I'd actually rather see Teel try it left than, say, recalling Corey Julks, who, hey, he's been hitting well at AAA, but we've seen what he can do. And the other reason I'm irked is you're the second worst team in baseball, and you're actually trying to act like a traditional team. You just are. You're almost trying to have standards where it's like, you're not expected to win at all the next 2 seasons. You should be experimenting. You should have complete freedom to try whatever you want. Be creative. That's why I'm not totally opposed to them trying to see if Brooks Baldwin can be a super utility player. And I'm not one of those guys that is opposed to asking players to try different positions in a season like this and possibly 2026 to maybe have, I actually value positional versatility. I think that's a good thing. That's why I like Miguel Vargas being able to play third and first base very well too, by the way. Where I'm opposed to it, and I would agree with a lot of those that are on the, hey, don't ask guys to do things that they're not able to do or that's not their position, is say like in 2021 or 2022, when the team asked Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets to play the outfield. That's a competitive window. You usually want to be set positionally by then. But if you're expected to lose 100 games, try things. But just be ready to pull the plug quickly if it does not work. Sort of like maybe you should pull the plug on having Lenine Sosa play first. Or realizing maybe Brooks Baldwin should get more reps in the outfield in AAA where games really, really don't matter. And that's actually where I was a bit more disappointed in this team. Because in the early part of the season, they were both in AAA, and neither one played first, or Teel didn't play in the outfield. I mean, that was a great time to get them the reps. But I do circle back that I get it if they want them to focus squarely on catching at the majors, because a lot of work has to be put in. You're talking about the one position that has to be involved in all 4 positions, all four phases of the game. And that's why if your catchers have an impact bat, that's a bonus. And that the Sox are hoping that they can be an impact bat, but you can tell when they're at the plate, they're just trying to look to make contact because they got to handle, the defensive part, shutting down the run game, calling a good game for the pitcher. That's a lot. So you're kind of seeing them being, just trying to figure out their way. So I get that. So if it would have just been, hey, we just want them to find their way at catcher, I'm fine with that. But we got enough at bats. I'm not a huge fan of that. Well, speaking of another bad comment from leadership, GM Chris Getz mentioned to the media on Monday that this team is considering just keeping Luis Robert Jr. rather than trading him at the deadline. Let's discuss how that would be a huge mistake after the break on Locked On White Sox. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you just stop managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. And I know my wife, she's getting all stressed out tracking all of our expenses, but no more since we started using Monarch Money. And we've been using it to make sure we can watch where we can cut on spending things we don't need and plan out saving for retirement, which for us is actually coming sooner than we think. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch a show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so Chris Getz, he spoke to the media on Monday, and honestly, I was happy with him just sitting behind the scenes and not saying anything. I was actually, I was preferring him to actually be a little quiet. I prefer to hear from like Brian Bannister and Ryan Fuller and even Will Venable when he's not being so close-minded about things. I mean, obviously, the only comments that didn't bother me were the rationale of promoting top prospect Noah Schultz. Basically confirmed that they just wanted to give him another challenge. And they're going to look more to, how many strikes is he throwing to balls. They're going to look to the strikes to ball ratio. Since Charlotte's ballpark is very hitter friendly, he kind of did acknowledge, like, we're not looking at the runs he's allowing because you're probably going to give up more runs in Charlotte than you are at Wright Field. They're going to look at, hey, is he throwing strikes? And I've always said that. Look at the whip, especially look at the walk rate. Those are the things that you want to look at when you're looking at a pitcher at AAA Charlotte for the White Sox. If they have a low ERA, then yes, that is impressive because they are limiting runs, which is very, very hard to do at Truist Park. There's a Truist Stadium or field. It's one of the Truist. I'm sorry that I forgot. I mean, I swear it seems like every ballpark in the South is Truist something. And he did acknowledge they need to see more consistency from hitting prospect Colson Montgomery before he gets called up. So at least the GM is also acknowledging seeing what we should all be seeing regarding those two. So I didn't mind that comment. But I think he keeps refusing to see what the rest of the baseball world is seeing, and that is Luis Robert Jr. just doesn't have the high trade value that Getz thinks he should have. And this is just my jump to conclusion after I read his comments on saying there's a real possibility LRJ is not traded at the deadline. This is again from Jack Ackney of White Sox on Sports Illustrated. When mapping out the next few seasons, could he see Robert as part of the White Sox future? Quote, that's a real possibility, Getz said. When you still watch Luis Robert play, you're looking at a guy who can change the game pretty quickly in a lot of different ways. Those types of players are hard to find. That's the reason why there's a lot of attention on Luis Robert, because he's earned that right. He's performed at a high level, and to find talent like that is not easy. Obviously, he's been more productive in the past, but that doesn't mean we don't believe in the potential here with the Chicago White Sox. We've never been out there making phone calls about Luis Robert. It's teams calling us, and we have conversations, and we stick to the plan that we've been working by so far, and which if we feel like we can help the long-term health of the organization, so be it. We like having Luis Robert, and I enjoy having him in the lineup on a nightly basis, end quote. Now, Jeff Passan of ESPN, he had his top 50 players that could likely, could be traded. He ranked Luis Robert Jr. 19, and he put, at 90%. I would like to think that it's 100%. And while in the offseason, Getz obviously did never come out, he didn't ever really come out and say, yep, I am shopping LRJ. We're going to trade him. And obviously no general manager says that. I mean, they're always usually somewhat lying. But it seemed like he was hinting at it, that they were going to deal him. And what he was hinting at is the reason why they weren't dealing with him was he just wasn't liking what other teams were offering because they were excluding probably what he was doing in what he did in 2023. You know, it looked like Getz was looking for that market value from that stellar 2023 season. But his market value is what it is. 2023 was an anomaly, and Getz has to accept that. 2023 was nothing but a career year. And while you can still sell the change of scenery to other teams are not going to pay a premium to take that risk. They're just not. You know, they'll take the, hey, yeah, you're right. Maybe a change of scenery. We'll get a good player. Maybe I'll give you, a prospect in the 15 to 20 range of our rankings. That's not going to get a team to think, oh, man, yeah, you're right. I got to give you a top 5 prospect. All he needs is a change of scenery, new stadium. Yep, you're right. And maybe he also just doesn't like the offers, despite possibly having to kick in cash, like the Athletics' Ken Rosenthal and Will Salmon reported last Friday that the team is willing to do. Maybe he doesn't like having to be like, I got to kick in money too. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think the reported trade with the Cincinnati Reds fell apart in the offseason. Now, granted, Getz really pushed for, I think it was Rhett Lauder, where I was like, dude, just take one of the top 5 hitting prospects and run. So I don't know if that might be it, but tough. Get this guy off the roster by the deadline because, yeah, the feeling is great. You don't pay someone $20 million to catch fly balls. And that is the calculus Getz is missing in his comment. That if you want to keep Luis Robert Jr. long term, you're going to have to pay him that $20 million option then. And he hasn't earned it. And I don't see a hot streak coming on anytime soon that says, yep, he's earned a good chunk of that payroll. And if you're citing that he's hit 2 home runs in his past 5 games, I just hope that motivates maybe a better offer if he continues to hit home runs. But it's not, hey, keep him for sustainability. Keep him because he can catch the ball. Keep him because he can run. That's Billy Hamilton, guys. What he's producing. Oh, he steals bases and he can play a stellar center field. Yeah, so can Michael A. Taylor. He gets $3 million. Billy Hamilton never made $20 million. Okay, that's what we're all missing in this calculus, guys. So unless you somehow have Scott Boras, which is Luis Robert Jr.'s agent, willing to negotiate a major discount, which he rarely does, if you're going to keep him past the deadline, you're then paying Luis Robert Jr.'s $2 million buyout. And if you want to argue, well, okay, pay him his $2 million buyout and bring him back on a make good 1-year deal. Okay, fine. But then you're competing with the market to get him. And he has looked, if you've seen him at the plate, he looks like a guy who probably doesn't want to be here half the time. What is it to say that he's like, okay, I'll just take my $5 million, make good with a contender? Because again, as Getz has said, they are getting calls on Louis Robert. So if you expose him to the market, and even though he might be potentially signed for like that 1-year, $5 million deal like Yohan Moncada got, what makes you think he's going to return to the White Sox? And maybe Getz is mad with himself for missing the moment to get the best deal, and he's just doubling down. But he just sounds like the guy who is, at the blackjack table, and he keeps getting wiped out. And then he keeps on saying, change here, $200 more. You just keep hearing the dealer changing 200, and then it's gone in like 5 minutes. Changing 200. Just realize that you've already lost. Just try to get what you can. And if you're bluffing on keeping him, just stop. Because everybody knows. Are you really going to pay him $20 million next season? No. So just take what you can get the best deal possible. Know that, obviously if you're still getting like a Trey McGo offer, okay. But even then, at the end of the day, there might be some value in just completely moving on from that failed rebuild of last decade. All right, so on this week's Way Back Wednesday segment, let's honor Noah Syndergaard's signing by going over who is on the White Sox all-time washed-up team, and that is after the break. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 13 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. And I think it's neat that it's completely online. Rugiet connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnMLB and use code LockedOnMLB to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnMLB and use promo code LockedOnMLB for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compound drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode and recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. All right, so the one thing this Noah Syndergaard signing feels like is one of those Kenny Williams signings or trading for former star players way past their primes. And I was kind of hoping that would be over. You remember, Kenny always got his man. I always wondered, where did Kenny really get that? Hey, we still got Ken Griffey Jr.'s on the market. We're going to get him. Maybe he got that from Ron Schuler, who he actually had a track record in the 90s of actually finding former stars and getting something out of them well past their primes. I mean, Bo Jackson was very impactful in that 1993 run. Julio Franco was amazing in 1994. But those are just still two guys. I mean, Kenny brought up just a ton of washed up stars to the South Side. And it was just like, man, I was kind of hoping that the one thing that Chris Getz could maybe deviate is just not try to bring these former all-star players way, way past their primes to the South Side. However, as I talked about it on yesterday, it kind of makes sense to see if Noah can make a comeback. I mean, this club needs pitching depth. And plus, insider John Heyman, he tweeted out that Syndergaard has an opt-out clause on August 1st. So he may not even ever pitch for the White Sox at the big league level. The possibility, it's a small possibility, but existent. Maybe he throws a few decent games at Charlotte and thinks, hey, maybe I can catch on with contender. Or again, maybe the White Sox hopefully don't trade Adrian Hauser and Aaron Savali. And if Syndergaard's like, hey, I'm not sticking around in Charlotte, okay, bye. That type of stuff. But I did get inspired by Daniel Victor of FutureSox.net and got his permission to use his tweet going over the all washed up team. And I have the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. It's at SlyDano70. And the main thing that I want to focus in on first is how he has the comment, no shade to these guys, more of an indictment to ownership who would have never have anteed up and signed any of these guys in their prime. And I think that is a great, great example of why actually Kenny had to bring in guys like Sandy Alomar way past their prime, or, Ken Griffey Jr. or Andrew Jones or Manny Ramirez, because they never would have traded the prospects he would have needed. And granted, Ken Griffey would have never come to Chicago. I mean, he was only going to Cincinnati when he demanded a trade out of Seattle. But still, they were never going to sign Ken Griffey to that massive extension that he got when he went to Cincinnati, where injury riddled, it turned out to be terrible money. But the other reason why I'm just not going completely over Daniel's team is I slightly deviate with my all washed up team. I don't agree with John Kruk or Steve Sachs being on there. So for those watching on YouTube, I have up on the video who is on my all washed up team. So I agree with Sandy Alomar Jr., but I got Justin Morneau. I got Roberto Alomar Jr. at second. Omar Vizquel, I agree. Shortstop. Kevin Youkilis at third. Manny Ramirez, Andrew Jones, Ken Griffey Jr. And then I'm just putting him on there. Jose Canseco as your DH. And then Steve Carlton would be the pitcher on the all washed up lineup. So in terms of Sandy Alomar Jr., remember, he had 3 different stints with the Sox in the 2000s. He still was way past his all-star days like he had in Cleveland. And his first two are actually respectable. What gets him on this list is he returned to Chicago in 2006 at the age of 40 in a trade with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And he produced a 217 average with a 603 OPS in 19 games. And the White Sox actually traded something to get him. Morneau obviously tortured the White Sox when he was with the Twins, wins an MVP in Minnesota, a couple Silver Sluggers. He actually won a batting title when he got traded to the Rockies. He ends his career with the White Sox in 2016, but he was 35, played in just 58 games, and he finished with a 261, 303, 429 slash line. Roberto Alomar, you can make the case for Jimmy Rollins actually being there over even Steve Sax, who was a late, he was there in the 90s. And Steve Sax, remember, actually was a star player when he was with the Dodgers briefly, who was in that famous Simpsons baseball episode too. But still, Alomar was 36. And he's in the Hall of Fame where Jimmy Rollins is still trying to make the Hall of Fame. So that's the other reason why I went with him. And Alomar played just 18 games with the White Sox with an average well below 200. Jimmy Rollins at least, provided a little bit of production, if I remember, in April before, obviously turning into a pumpkin. Omar Vizquel, yeah, clearly. He signed when he was 43 when he joined the Sox. But he actually was decent in 2010 when he played 108 games. He was actually decent at the plate, too, with the 276 average. It was just that Father Time caught up to him in 2011 with a 592 OPS, and he wasn't going to be winning any more Gold Gloves, with the White Sox. And he won 11, remember, in his career, 9 with Cleveland, 2 with the Giants. And then he stuck around with the organization as a minor league manager and got sued for sexual harassment allegations by a bat boy with autism too. And obviously that's all yucky and that type of stuff. And there had to be settlements, and the White Sox did have to let him go. Kevin Youkilis, he was acquired in a 2012 trade, and he actually was all right. A 771 OPS and 15 home runs after being acquired in that trade. But it was the start of the White Sox being mired in mediocrity by continuing to trade away prospects to get a guy like Youkilis. The team eventually started to erode, and 2012 was the last year that they had a 500 record or better until the 2020 season. They really wandered the wilderness the rest of the decade. Jones produced a 230 average during the 2010 season, his only season with the White Sox. Did hit 19 home runs and posted an 827 OPS that season too, but his days of, again, winning Gold Gloves and Silver Sluggers, well long gone. Griffey Jr., was with the Sox at the end of the 2008 season. And while obviously he was not the superstar player that he was in the 90s, and imagine him and Frank Thomas being paired up together. That would have been one of the most crushing lineups of all time. But he did at least throw out Michael Kadire in game 173, the blackout game in 2008 against the Twins for the AL Central title, keeping the Twins off the scoreboard, and it turned out to be huge because the White Sox won that game 1-0. Ramirez played only 24 games in 2010. You got to remember when you could still trade for players before August 31st if they had just cleared waivers. He hit just one of his 546 career home runs for the White Sox on the South Side after being acquired in one of those, after after the non-waiver trade deadline with the Dodgers. Jose Canseco finished his controversial career with the White Sox in 2001. The former AL MVP and Rookie of the Year was brought into DH after Frank Thomas was lost for the season with an injury. He had an 843 OPS and 16 home runs in 76 games. And then when it comes to pitchers, you could make the case for Tom Seaver, but he actually pitched all right in 1985. Carlton was still clinging to a big league career in 1986. Like, he was trying to stay in the majors, didn't know that, hey, you probably should have retired 2 years ago. He was released by the Philadelphia Phillies and the Giants that year in 1986. He was 41 when he signed with the club in August of that year, but he did go on to win 10 games. He did go on to go 4-3 in 10 starts. And remember, that's when wins and losses still mattered for a pitcher with a 3.69 ERA. It did allow the Hall of Famer and 4-time Cy Young winner to convince Cleveland to give him a shot in 87. So there, but again, that would be my all washed up team. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss, is the White Sox offense going to ever return again? Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding Will Venable being so dogmatic when it comes to just playing Edgar, Quero, and Kyle Teel at catcher. Not trading, Chris Getz not wanting to trade possibly not wanting to trade Luis Robert Jr. before the deadline. And this week's Way Back Wednesday going over the White Sox all washed up team. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.